Hello, everybody. We are going to get started right on time. I'm Dan Rust, and we'll do a quick little orientation regarding um, expectations and uh, uh, how to leverage the webinar platform here in just a moment. Welcome to Neurodiversity and Leadership, leveraging the strengths of unique thinking in yourself and your team. So really appreciate those of you who have logged in. I think we've got about 30 people logged in right now. Had about 150 register for the program. So I'm sure we'll have a few stragglers coming in the next few minutes, but we're going to get started right on time. So hopefully you can see my screen, and we'll go forward right now. I'm Dan Rust. I am the Vice President of Global Leadership Development for Infopro Learning. Infopro Learning has a clientele of Fortune 500 companies globally. We provide a broad range of learning and development services. And I'll give you just a few more details here coming up in order to pay for my supper, so to speak, since Infopro is sponsoring this program. I am the host of the Leadership Disrupted podcast. You can see my LinkedIn link here. You are welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. And I'm also the author of the book Workplace Poker, which is essentially a book about navigating human dynamics in the workplace, or what some people might call office politics. It's a very positive and ethical guide toward navigating office politics in the workplace. Um, and when it comes to InfoPro Learning, um, as I said, I am the head of leadership development, and essentially I lead a team of researchers, developers, and instructional designers who focus exclusively on the leadership space. We've developed a library of over 60 leadership development programs. You see many of the titles on the screen here. And if at any point any of you might be curious about any of those specific programs, you can follow up and we would be happy to provide details to you. So I wanted to get through that relatively quickly because I don't want this to be a long commercial, but in fact, um, part of the goal of InfoPro sponsoring a program like this is to promote our leadership development courses. So there, paid for our supper, so to speak. Um, in terms of etiquette for today's session, we're going to start with everyone on mute, but you can unmute. So you are welcome to speak if you have questions or if you have commentary. You are absolutely welcome to speak. You can use the raise the hand option as well. So you can raise your hand, and I will endeavor to pay attention to the screen. But if I happen to not see it, Somnath is here with me, and he will definitely grab my attention
Yes,
and make sure that we
absolutely.
we we call on you. We're going to have a few polls, discussions, activities, and we just encourage you to participate. This hour is going to fly by pretty fast, I can guarantee you. And you can also use the chat function, so you can use chat to share your commentary with myself and with others. You can use the chat to ask questions. You can use the chat to respond in any way that you see fit. Also, Somnath is going to upload into the chat my notes for today. So
Yep.
everything that you see on the screen and a fair amount that you don't see on the screen, all of that is going to be captured, not just by Firefly, although we're using Firefly as a transcriber, so you can capture those notes. But I have a formal show notes document that captures everything as well. So don't feel like you have to memorize everything that you see on the screen or everything that you hear. So with that, we're going to get started. Um, so if you're like me, um, and like many of us, you may have a sense that um, we're struggling with leadership in today's world. If you think about leadership at the global level, at the political level, at the religious level, at the organizational level, at the business level, it does feel like we're yearning for more from our leaders today. That and not just senior leaders, but mid-level, even early stage leaders. There just feels like there's a gap between what we need from leaders and what leaders are able to to offer us. And there are probably many contributors to that gap, but I'm going to posit a thesis that one of the drivers of the gap is that the world we work and live in today is more complicated, is running faster than ever before, has more moving parts than ever before, and it actually makes it more challenging to lead today. And we, in many cases, have leaders who are not meeting the moment, are not rising to the moment. And when I talk about these challenges and a world that's moving faster and has more moving parts, I'll just give you a couple of examples. We're all overwhelmed with information, overwhelmed with the flow of business, overwhelmed with emails, voicemails, chats, everything. There's just so much flowing at us. We're all experiencing, either consciously or not, a bit of cognitive overload. Like our brains are overclocked trying to process all of this information. We have not just information, but disinformation. We have media, we have entertainment, we have news, we have business, we have commercial, we have so much flowing at us, both real and not real. And oftentimes it's hard to know what is real, what is not real. And it's being fed to us through our phones, through other devices, 7/24, constant exposure. So when we talk about cognitive overload, we have gotten so used to this. We may not be, it might be like the proverbial frog where the water slowly, warms up, warms up, warms up. And so we're not really noticing the boiling water, but in fact, we're living and working in boiling water of cognitive overload. We're globalized. So we're being exposed to information from across the globe at any given moment. We have such a broad range of diversity now in the workplace, the people that we work with. So there are lots of different types of behaviors, types of personalities, types of behavioral styles, types of communication styles. We're dealing with so many different kinds of people day in and day out. We have 5 generations in the workplace, in many workplaces, 5 generations in the workplace. And those generations bring with them different expectations, different values, different habits, different styles. We have remote workers, we have hybrid workers, we have in-office workers. Again, that just adds to the disruption and the complexity. We have AI and technology. Technology is moving faster, faster, faster. AI is expanding. AI is becoming smarter and smarter and smarter. We have people who have a growing sense that they're not sure that they can trust the overall system. They're not sure that they can trust what the world in general has for them. And in fact, the younger generations today are the first generations in over 60 years that actually have a sense that the future is not going to be better for them than it was for their parents. In addition, our workers, our employees, ourselves are more medicated than ever before, more caffeinated than ever before. The industrial food that we're consuming is less healthy than ever before, and yet we're more tired than ever before. And the reason I bring all of this up is because the world is more challenging to lead. And so when we talk about that frog in the boiling water, the water is heating up. It's getting hotter and hotter and hotter with all of these disruptions. And so what employees are asking for from leaders, and this is reinforced survey after survey after survey, employees are asking for greater empathy and emotional intelligence. They're asking for greater flexibility and autonomy. They're asking for more from their leaders and are often struggling because it seems like leaders are not necessarily meeting that moment. Now, I'm not trying to beat up on leaders because leaders are struggling as well. Leaders are trying to deal with a world that's moving faster, that is more complicated. There's just more happening. We're asking for more from our leaders. And the gaps that are most commonly shared by employees when they're asked is inadequate communication from their leaders, struggling with hybrid work leadership, burnout among their managers and leaders. And also, there are many employees who report a sense that their leaders just aren't functionally competent, meaning they don't know their actual functional roles as well as they would hope. So it's a tough landscape for leaders in many cases. And it's one of the reasons why many employees look at their leaders. They look at leaders from the top all the way down. They look at global leadership, political leadership, religious leadership, organizational, nonprofit leadership, military leadership, and then their business leadership from the top down, and have a sense that there are a fair number of what some might call empty suits, leaders who are not meeting the moment. And how does this relate to neurodiversity? Because I think in order to meet the moment, leaders are going to have to go deeper than perhaps they've gone in the past. Leaders are going to have to develop a deeper understanding of their business, a deeper commitment to growing their own skills, a deeper understanding of customers, a deeper understanding of employees, a deeper approach to relationships with employees, deeper communication, deeper commitments. In order to meet this moment of faster, more complicated, more happening, in order to meet the moment, I do think it is going to require a deeper level of leadership. And today we're not going to try boil that whole ocean of deeper. We're going to just take one small part of that element. And so when it comes to neurodiversity, developing a deeper understanding of ourselves, of each other, of our employees, of our families, of our loved ones, to the degree that we can, in fact, see people at a deeper level, that is going to help us in the goal of becoming deeper leaders, broadly speaking. And I'll be posting additional webinars over the next several months to address different elements of deeper, different elements of going deep as a leader. But this one today is going to be simply focused on neurodiversity. And I want to start because we're going to be using a lot of labels. We're going to be throwing out a lot of words. And it makes me uncomfortable to a certain degree because I love this quote from Kierkegaard: "Once you label me, you negate me." I love the quote because number one, I think it's very relevant, and secondly, I get to use Kierkegaard as a part of the webinar, so that just gives me intellectual credibility to use a philosopher like Kierkegaard. But in fact, I think we have to be careful when we label ourselves and when we label each other, because the moment you decide, oh, he's doing that because he's on the spectrum, or he's doing that because he's autistic, or she's doing this because, the moment we label people, we tend to negate them. And so I just want us to be thoughtful in our day-to-day interactions when we decide we know what's going on because of the way we've labeled somebody. So enough of a lecture from me. So let's talk about neurodiversity. Now, I don't know, those of you who are on the call, we have a broad range of people. For some of you, this is going to be all brand new. For some of this is just old hat. This is something you're very familiar with. So you'll see this reference to this definition in the show notes as well. And I'm just looking to confirm. Samnath, have you uploaded the show notes into the chat?
Right.
Excellent.
I am just doing it right away.
Excellent. So you can download this definition and all of the other show notes. But the important point to make here is that neurodiversity is a natural variation in human cognitive functioning. So these are extremes, and we'll go into the extremes here in a moment. But for the typical or normal or common workplace, it may be that some of these variations are viewed as out of the norm, but in a different workplace, in a different environment, those variations might in fact be normalized. So if you're working with a group of computer programmers, for example, what might be very normalized in that particular work environment, when you shift to a different work environment, some of those behaviors might actually then be viewed as extreme or outside of the norm. But in fact, all of these variations in cognitive functioning are normal variations. It's just uh, the question is, to what degree are they optimized, or to what degree do they fit within a particular work environment? And many of us already have experience with different cognitive styles. Many of you are familiar with the DISC behavioral model. So the DISC behavioral model, the DISC behavioral model, when you think about it, it's really a model for cognitive variance, different cognitive styles, four different styles. And we're not going to go into detail in DISC, but I want you to think about this. If your DISC is so much a common part of a lot of the ways that we all think about others in the workplace. And so we're already used to thinking about extremes in dominance, or extremes in influence, or conscientiousness, or steadiness. And so the neurodiverse spectrum or spectra that we are focusing on, it's just taking that to an extreme. So there are actually these 7 natural neural spectra that represent neurodiversity in the classic sense. When we talk about neurodiversity, we're talking about attention spectrum, just the way people focus, the degree to which people are able to focus. Oftentimes, when someone has a struggle with being able to focus consistently, that's associated with ADHD. But the attention spectrum is a broad spectrum from being hyper-focused to being unable to focus at all. The same is true with social spectrum. There's a spectrum of behavior where some individuals are incredibly adept at socializing and engaging with others, and the others are at the very other extreme of that spectrum. Communication capability. Again, each of these spectrum represents a certain set of cognitive capabilities. And I mean, I don't want to dive too deep into each of them. I think some of them are self-explanatory. I do have definitions in the show notes for each of them. But in general, when you look at these 7 areas of cognitive functioning, when we talk about neurodiversity, it is so unique to the individual. There is no single pattern for neurodiversity. You may have individuals who are within the normal range of functioning in every sense except for one of these spectra. It may be one person is at an extreme when it comes to social interaction, or at an extreme when it comes to sensory sensitivity, or at an extreme when it comes to executive function. So there is no one single template for what it means to be neurodiverse. And going back to the challenge with labeling, even labeling someone as having sensory sensitivity or executive function challenges or social interaction challenges, it may be true, but there's also some recent research that indicates that some of the ways that neurodiversity presents itself in the workplace may not actually be a function of cognition, but might be a function of sleep patterns, might be a function of dietary patterns, might be a function of other patterns. So in fact, what sometimes looks like a neurodiversity issue may in fact be a dietary issue, may in fact be an energy issue, may in fact be something beyond true neurodiversity issues. So if this webinar actually causes you to begin to self-reflect and wonder about yourself or wonder about others, I would say don't leap to a self-diagnosis. Don't leap to a diagnosis of others. These are actually very complex issues, and I would encourage you to have a formal evaluation, a thorough evaluation, in order to create real self-awareness so that you can, in fact, determine, are you neurodiverse? Are you not? In what ways are you neurodiverse? And then what can ultimately be done about that? But I want to ask you, what if these behaviors that we sometimes label as unusual or challenging are actually just untapped signals of potential? Neurodiverse people do tend to think differently, do tend to process information differently, and there are oftentimes situations where suddenly having that different point of view, having that different way of processing becomes hyper valuable for us. So oftentimes that that person who is processing differently can be there for us for particularly challenging times or different circumstances. I noticed Megan made a note here about ADHD. People often hyperfocus, not that they always have trouble focusing, and they have difficulty with executive functioning unless they have systems that work. Of course, there is more to it, but just wanted to offer that up. Absolutely. Thank you, Megan. Great comment. So, and we live in a world today where there are lots of potential systems to support us, technical systems, other systems, human support as well. So in many cases, we can in fact identify the gaps and fill the gaps with support systems and structures to minimize the gap between optimal performance and the performance that perhaps comes naturally from a neurodiverse individual. There are some common strengths, and that's really, I want to start with that because there are, in fact, some very common strengths when it comes to neurodiverse individuals. I'll show you just a couple of them on the screen. Neurodiverse individuals tend to be, or I don't want to say tend to, they can be extremely creative and innovative. They tend to not find themselves limited by the traditional thinking, so they can become very effective at thinking differently, processing differently. They can be hyper-focused sometimes, where they can, in fact, drill in and immerse themselves in particular issues, challenges, problems. They can be great problem solvers. They can have high attention to detail. One of the, I guess, my favorite characteristics about the neurodiverse is that deception does not come naturally to them. It's an interesting characteristic of the neurodiverse. Now, not that they can't lie. Of course, neurodiverse folks, like the rest of us, can learn to lie, but their natural tendency is to be transparent and authentic. And this is one of the reasons some people think that neurodiverse people on the autism spectrum, etc., don't make great salespeople. But in fact, some of the best salespeople I've ever worked with are on the spectrum because they are very focused on facts, on data. They're very systemic, they're very process oriented, and they're very worthy of trust. So again, there are oftentimes misconceptions about the kinds of roles that people who are neurodiverse can excel in. And I will say neurodiverse individuals, it's not always true, but it is sometimes true that they can excel in sales and persuasion roles. And they do tend to have strong memory. So these are fantastic strengths to leverage. But of course, we know that it's not all strengths. There are also common challenges. Let me just ask, if there's anyone on the call who has any other common strengths that you want to throw out or add into the chat. I'll highlight those if you share those in the chat itself. I don't want I want to ignore if pattern recognition. Absolutely, pattern recognition is huge. I know a number of diverse thinkers who are able to take in lots of information and in taking that in can see patterns that others cannot see. And then suddenly when they see it, when it bubbles up and they see it, everyone goes, yes, of course. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. But sometimes it takes a neurodiverse thinker to see that pattern individually. Thank you for sharing that, Yvonne. Or was that, I have to scroll. It might not have been Yvonne. Who was that? That was Taryn. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Taryn. They can be highly empathetic. Yes, because of their own experience. Absolutely, they can be higher empathetic. And while their super strong senses can be overwhelming, that also can be useful because again, their radar is on with an intensity level that perhaps others don't have that same level of intensity. So absolutely, there are strengths, and of course, it's not all strengths. And I don't want to hold up the neurodiverse as the magical neurodiverse because there are strengths And then there are challenges with the neurodiverse as well. And I say this as a neurodiverse individual. I was not diagnosed formally until my late adulthood, which has its own benefits. So the fact that I was never labeled as neurodiverse in my formative years, in my growing years, I think there were some benefits to that, probably some challenges as well. But when it comes to uh, challenges, let's go to that. So um, organization and time management doesn't come naturally to many of the neurodiverse, mostly because, and again, I'll speak from personal experience, mostly because they live in their heads a lot and they love living in their heads. We love living in our heads. And so sometimes getting pulled back into the day-to-day practicalities of tasks, the practicalities of time management, the practicalities of executive function. Um, Sometimes it's not a strength. Communication can absolutely be a challenge with the neurodiverse, but I will say I have seen so many, I've experienced so many neurodiverse individuals who focus on enhancing their communication skills, who become not only more effective communicators, they become fantastic communicators when they decide to study it, when they decide to master it, but it requires conscious mastery for many of them. Whereas uh, some individuals sort of grow up with a very natural ability to communicate with other humans. For the neurodiverse, oftentimes this requires very conscious effort, but when that conscious effort is applied, they can become extraordinary. Absolutely, Yvonne, time blindness is an absolute thing. And I used to wonder when I was growing up what would happen because I would get lost in time. I would get lost in you hear the phrase lost in thought. I would absolutely get lost in thought. And then suddenly, when I come out of that thought, a chunk of time has gone by that I didn't realize that's how much. Now, so that is both a challenge and a strength. The ability to get lost in a thought, the ability to go deep, the ability to fully immerse oneself in some particular issue, topic, challenge, problem, absolutely has potential benefits to it, but it creates some challenges as well. Um, and when the beauty of living in your head is that you create a world that works for you. And sometimes the world outside of one's head is so mundane and boring, and yet it's the world we have to live in. We have to come back to the real world in order to actually exist and coexist, etc. So you can see I'm looking at the screen here. Any other common challenges for those of you who are on the call and might be beneficiaries of neurodiverse thinking yourself? Any other common challenges you experience? Um, I'm going to go to emotional regulation for in a moment, but I just didn't want to uh, ignore if anyone else has any other commentary. Um, in terms of black and white thinking and the expectations of others, absolutely. Bottom-up processing can be a challenge for sure. Um, Being challenged with empathy. Thank you, Paul. Definitely that can be an issue. When it comes to emotional regulation, one of the common challenges of the neurodiverse is accepting of critical feedback, accepting of criticism, accepting of particularly if that criticism is delivered with a high level of emotion or intensity. Um, when Because of the way the neurodiverse typically process, when they're given critical, angry, frustrated feedback, it can be overwhelming to the point of shutdown, where then they absolutely cannot accept the feedback. They have to shut down as a pure self-protection because that feedback is going to their core. It's impacting them so intensely. So having the ability to help yourself recognize when you're starting to shut down or when you're about to shut down. Sometimes just recognizing that the shutdown is starting to occur and reminding yourself not to take it as personally, not to take it with as much intensity, reminding yourself that the feedback is important, reminding yourself not to shut down, because we can't assume that the rest of the world is going to modify itself just to suit us. So sometimes the world is going to be frustrated with us. Sometimes the world is going to be angry with us. Sometimes the world is going to be disappointed with us. And sometimes the world is going to give us feedback in a less than gracious way, in a less than elegant way. And sometimes it's going to be fair feedback, and sometimes it's going to be absolutely unfair feedback. The world, doesn't orient itself to suit our particular cognitive functioning. And so by reminding, I'll just share my own experience, by reminding myself of how intense critical feedback feels to me. And when I start to feel myself shutting down, just recognizing this is an important moment. It's important to me to hear what's being said. It's important to me to understand what's being said. I don't have to agree with it. I don't have to, but I also don't have to protect myself. I don't have to shut down out of self-protection. Sometimes just that moment of recognition can not only help me take in information, but it can help the other person, because sometimes others dial up because they don't think we're getting it. They deliver feedback and they feel like we're not getting the feedback. So what do? They dial it up. And we still don't appear to be getting it. They dial it up even further. I'm not saying that's right. I'm saying it's a not uncommon dynamic. And so as a neurodiverse individual, it's important that you regulate your own emotions, you regulate your own mental energies, particularly during challenging discussions, challenging conversations, and when receiving challenging feedback. So there are some common misconceptions when it comes to the neurodiverse. Number one, there's this misconception that you can always tell. You can tell when someone's on the spectrum. He's on the spectrum. She's on the spectrum. There are tells. Certainly there are tells, but there are also many neurodiverse individuals who mask their behaviors. And I'll raise my hand. I'm one of them. I spent a lot of years masking some of my challenges because I wanted to be a normie. I wanted to fit into the world. So I would go to loud parties, even though one of my masking behaviors, I would go to loud parties and I would be overwhelmed by the loud background music, by the loud conversation, by the loud everything. And I literally couldn't hear what people were saying. I learned to read lips. I found myself reading lips because I actually couldn't hear I was just cognitively overwhelmed, but I was essentially pretending to be able to have conversations with people. And people would say things and they would laugh and I would just mirror their laughter, or they would affect a certain look. I would just mirror their look, attempting to normalize in an environment where I was just overwhelmed. And so there are a lot of neurodiverse individuals traveling amongst us who, to varying degrees, are comfortable or uncomfortable with sharing their neurodiversity. And I'm going to give you just one example of a misconception. Now, some of you, I'm sorry, I went a little fast. Some of you are familiar with the comedy series "It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia," or you might be familiar with the other comedy series called, I think it's Mythic Quest. Um, Rob McElhenney, who is the star of "It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia," um, I think he's an interesting example for neurodiverse individuals because he's not someone that most of us would say, oh yeah, that's someone who projects neurodiversity. Whereas if I showed you a photo of Elon Musk, we'd all go, well, yeah, of course. We all get that Elon is on the spectrum. Or if I showed you a photo of other Temple Grandin or some of the others, we'd go, yeah, yeah, yeah. But Rob McElhenney, who is a comedian, who is hyper successful, who just projects a certain level of engagement and confidence. And if you're not familiar with Rob, I would you can see him on "It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia," and he's a very well He's a very well recognized Hollywood star. Um, Also happens to be recently as an adult um, uh, diagnosed as neurodiverse. And there's a recent article in Variety, and I would encourage you to go to this article. In fact, I'm going to come out um, of the PowerPoint because I know I saved the link to the article, and I'm going to put it in the chat function because I think you would find it interesting. Now, the only a very small portion of this article is um, is related to the neurodiverse. In fact, it's like a paragraph in the entire article. But as you read it, you get a sense that um, the actually being diagnosed and coming to understand his own neurodiversity um, was a very positive for his parenting, a positive for his marriage, a positive for his working, and it actually helped to explain a lot of challenges he had experienced over the years, which he had just not really understood. But the reason I'm sharing this is he would be a great example of someone we wouldn't normally instinctively say, oh yeah, there's a neurodiverse person. And so there are a lot of us in the workplace who don't project typical neurodiversity, and we have figured out ways to navigate the waters of the modern work environment. And what we're all often known for in the workplace is people who can take a lot of information in, people who are creative thinkers, innovative thinkers, people who get work done. There's an interesting misconception amongst some that the neurodiverse cannot lead, but neurodiverse folks can make fantastic leaders. They tend to be very conscious leaders. They're conscious of how to lead. They may not be instinctive leaders, but they're very conscious and learned leaders, or at least they can be. Um, I think there's also a misconception that accommodating neurodiversity in the workplace has to be complicated. I don't think it has to be complicated. Again, it depends on the individuals, depends on the situation, but I know that in fact, accommodating neurodiversity in the workplace can actually be pretty easy and simple. Generally, it's as simple as recognizing some people process information differently, some people process the world differently, and maybe we should make some adjustments in terms of how we operate in the workplace. If anyone wants to share any other examples of like misconceptions that they're aware of in the workplace, go right ahead, and I'll when we see them in the chat function, I will certainly highlight them or share them. So, if in fact you are a neurodiverse leader, and I'm going to guess many of you on this call are in fact neurodiverse leaders, the first thing I would encourage you to do is to know yourself deeply. And take the time, and I'm going to quickly scroll up again to this. Take the time to understand your particular, let's go to take the time to understand your particular diversity, your particular approach to processing the world on each of these spectra. Take that time so that as you understand yourself more deeply, it's going to help you bridge the gaps with others. It's going to help you understand where there sometimes are disconnects and why those disconnects exist. It's going to help you take charge of that disconnect, because in many cases, it's not about um, expressing the fact or sharing the fact. You don't necessarily have to share with the world um, that you are on the spectrum or that you are neurodiverse. I'm not saying you should or you shouldn't. It might make sense to, it might make sense not to. Don't assume every work environment is a safe space, because every work environment is not a safe space. But you can, in fact, as you gain a deeper understanding of yourself, it can help you understand how to bridge your connections with others. So if you have an executive function challenge, recognizing that and then building systems around yourself, because if you understand how your executive function challenge impacts others And it can have a dramatic impact on the rest of the world, or your social spectrum, or your attention spectrum, whatever challenges you might have, understanding them deeply first. Number one, I think to it helps to help you not judge yourself, not feel like you are bad or not good at something. I think it's part of the process of actually coming to self-acceptance. So now I have to quickly scroll back up um, to my slide. Okay, here we are. As a neurodiverse leader, um, I like the phrase design for your strengths and buffer for your gaps. So when you think about your daily schedule, your weekly schedule, your approach to projects, your approach to managing a team, your approach to managing people, if you think through both your strengths and your limitations, design your work environment to leverage and lean into your strengths, but also buffer for your gaps. So if you are somebody with an executive function challenge, for example, there are plenty of systems to provide support. AI is becoming a huge tool, or it can be a huge tool, to help buffer some of those gaps. Also, as a leader, I would say creating cognitive diversity on your team is important. So there are some leaders, some neurodiverse leaders who unconsciously build out a a team like themselves. It happens particularly in the IT world, but not just the IT world. And it may be that your team would benefit from a few folks who don't necessarily process the world the way you do, a few folks who might process in a more normative way. So sometimes you have to, in fact, say, all right, I need to move beyond just my comfort zone. And in fact, find individuals who think differently than I think. Also, I think for the neurodiverse, we have to, as leaders, communicate very intentionally, and make sure that our nuance, our tone, our social cues, because they can be tricky for us, we have to be thoughtful about them. But I am living proof that if you focus in on um, all of the nuances of human communication. You can master the nuances of human communication and, in fact, be an extraordinary communicator and an extraordinarily conscious communicator. But for the neurodiverse, it does have to be conscious. It's generally not something that comes to them naturally. I see people who are posting links to LinkedIn articles and individuals. That's fantastic. Thank you for doing that. Um, I'm going to leave it at that unless there are any. I'm going to move on to the next topic. And unless, are there any other quick tips that anyone wants to share in terms of those of you who are neurodiverse leaders, what you have learned, skills that you've learned in the workplace, um, that help you be a more effective leader? The I'll share one last skill that did not come naturally to me. We talked earlier about the neurodiverse being instinctively authentic, instinctively truthful. Well, so one of the things that I was challenged with, because I'm instinctively, I don't like to lie. So I generally don't give compliments unless I actually think, oh yeah, that's excellent work, or that's fantastic work, or oh I mean, I never say to someone, "Oh, that is genius level work," unless it's actually genius level work. But the challenge then is I constantly talk myself out of giving someone a compliment. And I know that complimenting others in the workplace is good for them. Acknowledging what they do well is good for them. So recognizing that giving compliments is important, and compliments can be authentic, um, but then you have to consciously think through the importance and the authenticity of your compliments. But giving others compliments does not come naturally to the neurodiverse because they tend to like over process the compliment before they even give it. And I would just say, if your gut is saying, "Hey, it would be good to share a positive commentary with someone about something," go right ahead and share that positive commentary. So now, this section was originally titled How to Help Your Neurodiverse Team Thrive. But in fact, as I went through the show notes and I went through the recommendations, in fact, every single recommendation for helping your neurodiverse team thrive is a recommendation just for a team. It's absolutely the same best practices. Number one, prioritize clarity. In today's world, in fact, you could make the case, because if we go back to one of the original slides about all of us being in cognitive overload, all of us being overwhelmed with 724 news media, entertainment media, business media, commercial media, and information and misinformation, on some level, we're all cognitively overloaded. We're all neurodiverse, or operating as if we were neurodiverse. And so, as a leader, prioritizing clarity, meaning strip out the fluff, decide what do my people need to know, what do my people need to do, and let me tell them what they need to know, let me communicate with them what they need to do. Prioritizing clarity over all else is hugely important for any team in today's world, particularly if there are neurodiverse individuals on the team. Designed for consistency, and then allow for flexibility. But the neurodiverse do appreciate consistency, consistent work patterns, consistent processes, consistent systems. But of course, there has to be flexibility. But it's not just the neurodiverse. In today's complicated, fast-moving world, we all love to know, what can I count on? What can I depend on? Use multi-modes of communication. It's not enough just to send out an email. If there's an important message, use multiple. First of all, use the right mode, and then use multiple modes of communication, and make psychological safety non-negotiable. Again, you can make the case this is particularly important to the neurodiverse, but it's important to everybody. Everybody is seeking that work environment where it's okay to make an error. It's okay to make a mistake and to raise your hand and say, I'm sorry, I got that wrong. It's okay to have missed a comment and to say, could you repeat that? I think I missed a particular detail. We want to create psychologically safe work environments for everyone. And yes, the neurodiverse will particularly benefit, but everyone will benefit in today's world. And the last thing I'm gonna say for the purpose of this webinar, although if you go to the show notes, you'll see there are a ton of tips in terms of helping your team thrive. Don't force social norms. You know, and this isn't just for the neurodiverse. Whenever you require, for example, when there are in the days of after office parties or out of office parties, or the days of after hours work activities, or the days of you going out to dinner with the team, or having activities with the team, or having quote fun activities even in the office environment. Just being sensitive to neurodiversity in terms of how those things are executed. Not everybody gets energized by sharing, for example. So, pulling everyone into a circle and say, hey, we're gonna do a team building activity, and we're gonna have everybody share one, the thing, two truths and a lie, or we're gonna have everyone share some interesting, unique characteristic about them. We're gonna get to know each other better. That's not wrong. I just think it's important to be sensitive to the fact that that gets processed differently by some than others. So be thoughtful about your overall approach to that team working environment. Be direct, be kind, be constructive. It is okay to approach a neurodiverse individual who's having some performance challenges. They need feedback. I need feedback. We all need feedback. And what they need is feedback that is, first of all, accurate, but then also kind and direct, with some sense of hope, with some sense of here's how we can make it better. Here's how we can help you, operate more optimally. So again, these are all just good, solid team building practices in a world of cognitive overwhelm. And I want to move in as we come close to the wrap up. Um, I'm going to just share a few tips when the neurodiverse are leading the neurodiverse. And of course, when we use that term neurodiverse, remember we're talking about 7 different spectra. So neurodiverse person A is not the same as neurodiverse person B. So the first recommendation when it comes to the neurodiverse leading the neurodiverse is don't assume similarity. Don't assume sameness. Don't assume that, oh, because I process the world this way and you seem to be kind of like me, you're going to process it in exactly the same way. I would say instead, stay curious about your folks, stay curious about the people that you work with, and I use the term crack the code. Crack the code on each of the people that you work with. Does this take more time? Yes. At the very beginning, when we talked about leading deep, going deeper with each of your individuals, I do think in today's world, to be effective as a leader, you need a deeper bond, a deeper connection. Leading is not about, okay, let's talk about your quarterly OKRs or your quarterly KPIs, and I'm going to track every week. How are you progressing with your KPIs? Now that stuff's important. Yes, it's important to be accountable. It's important to have accountabilities, but I think what we're looking for from our leaders today is a deeper relationship, a deeper connection. And it may be a little more challenging for the neurodiverse to create that deeper connection, but that's the job. That's part of the job. And so pay close attention and
So
crack the
Dan,
code on
I
every.
want to interrupt here. Christina has a question here that it is common for a neurodiverse person to come across as unauthentic.
Is that a question? Is it common for a neurodiverse
Yeah.
person to come across as inauthentic? Um, you know what? It can happen when it's clear that they're trying. It's clear that they're working hard. Let's say when a neurodiverse person is trying to be charming or trying to be funny or trying to create a human connection, it can be a little awkward at first because like any new skill, like any new thing that we're trying, it I think the way for a neurodiverse individual to bridge that gap is to acknowledge the discomfort, acknowledge that something isn't coming naturally to you at the moment. So rather than trying to pretend to be something that you're not, you don't have to acknowledge your neurodiversity, but you can just say, hey, I'm really not good at this social stuff. Or, hey, I'm not, this sort of thing doesn't come naturally to me, but I'd like to try this. Like acknowledging that you have a gap, a little bit of self-deprecating humor, not beating up on yourself, not being ashamed of yourself, but just being willing to lightly say, hey, I know I'm not great at this, but I'd like to try this, whatever it might be. That can help. But I will say, after a while, with enough effort, this is an absolute truth. As a neurodiverse individual, you can be funny, you can be charming, you can be amazingly social in your own particular way. It takes conscious effort and time, but you can absolutely connect with people on a deep emotional level. It's going to be slightly different and more conscious than it might be for someone from it comes a little more naturally. Um, when it comes to, again, the neurodiverse leading the neurodiverse, I'd be thoughtful about maybe your own unconscious biases because um, we all have bias. We all have preferences. Um, I I will acknowledge, for example, because I'm not someone who just talks off the cuff. I'm not someone who can carry on a long rambling conversation. I have tended to, in the past, judge those people who are, back to the disc model, like high eyes, who they can take a single topic and they can have a conversation for an hour about almost nothing. They can talk about nothing for an hour. I'm not someone who easily talks about nothing. And I used to judge those individuals and judge them as lesser than. And so I think we have to be thoughtful and careful about our own unconscious bias toward our own strengths, where we think, oh, yeah, my strengths are the way to be. So again, if you're neurodiverse and you're leading others who are neurodiverse, just be thoughtful about not just indexing toward the way you are and assuming others should be the way you are. Um, Sometimes neurodiverse leaders can under communicate because they make assumptions. If I sent the email, I gave them the bullet points, I provided the feedback, I gave the data. What more can there be if I've given the data? And so be conscious of not under communicating or your perhaps tendency to under communicate. I I don't like repeating myself. And yet in today's world, if a message is important, it's probably important that you repeat that message 3, 4 times in 3 or 4 different ways, finding ways to repeat a critical message. Um, Even though it frustrates you thinking, well, I already said this as clearly as I could say it. So again, if you are a neurodiverse individual leading other neurodiverse individuals, be thoughtful about communicating, frequently communicating with repetition when necessary, and don't assume that the overall, the sensory environment, should just align with your needs. If you're someone who really likes a quiet environment, and needs a quiet environment to process information, to think clearly, that isn't necessarily the right external environment for every other neurodiverse people. You know this. I have neurodiverse friends who get their best work done when they have earbuds in playing loud music. I have other neurodiverse friends who get their best work done in absolute silence. I have other new neurodiverse friends who will go to a coffee shop and get their best work done sitting in a Starbucks when there's a buzz around them, because something about that buzz around them with people buzzing, it works for them. Each of us operates differently, operates uniquely, and don't assume as a leader that everyone else is going to process the world in the way that you process the world. Um, Last thing I would ask you to avoid is the burnout trap, because neurodiverse individuals are famous for taking on too much. Just we just for a variety of reasons. It's not just a single reason. It's actually a very complicated issue, because some of us take on too much because of our inherent discomfort with the way we are, and we think, well, if I'm just known as somebody who gets a lot of that stuff done, then they won't notice these other things about me, or they won't feel bad about me for these other reasons. Some of us take on too much because our minds love having lots of things to think about, but having lots of things to think about um, doesn't avoid the fact that you still have stuff to do, things to get done. Some of us, once we do the work in our head, we have a hard time going out into the real world and getting the world done in the real world. So we'll be hyper engaged in a problem or in a project in our minds, and then suddenly we can see it. We can see the solution, or we can see what the presentation should look like, or we can see what the solution should look like. And now our fingers have to go to work and actually type it out, draft it out, write it out, create it, draw it, whatever it is. And suddenly things slow down because the slog of actual execution in the real world is not nearly as enticing or entertaining or compelling as the work we did in our heads. Just recognizing that that can burn you out, and recognizing that you have to modify your workload so that you can actually execute. So you can create in your head, but then give yourself the time to get it done, to get it executed. With that said, I want to be cautious of the time. We're right at the end of today's session. Um, I will say again, you've got the show notes with all of the details and a lot more of the details. Um, those of you who have additional commentary, you are welcome to share commentary. But I'm going to close out the formal session. We'll be reaching out to you with information on future sessions when we talk about, and I'm going to I do think Somnath, you're going to be sending a thing. You're going to be
Yes.
sending
Yes.
a webinar evaluation. So, of
Absolutely.
course, would love you for you to complete the evaluation. If you have critical commentary, please be kind. Just be kind, because of course I'm going to take it extremely personally. Um, and last comment, I'm going to go back to one of the earlier slides here. Um, when we talk about as leaders going deep. It's not necessarily fair, but I think the world does need us to be deeper leaders, better leaders in so many ways. Not just in this way, but in so many possible ways. The world needs more from us. So this is my little effort in 1 hour to try to help notch us in a deeper direction. So thanks everybody. Very good having all of you on the webinar. I appreciate it. Thanks.
And thank you, Dan, and thank you, everyone. Please have a great rest of your day. Thank you.